Hi, this is
Gabe Ignetti.
And this is Eric Schmitz.
and this is the Ecomodernist.
Soapbox.
We have with us a group of leading activists who have come together to discuss how to build our small but growing movement. They are Eric Meyer of Generation Atomic, Heather Matheson of Mothers for Nuclear, Gary Kahanak from the Climate Coalition, along with authors and activists Theis Beckers and Meredith Angwin.
Welcome to the show. Could you all tell us a little bit about yourselves and your organization?
Absolutely. Thanks for having us, Gabriel and Eric. Yeah, this is Eric Meyer from Generation Atomic here. Let's see, about 2 years ago and change, I started Generation Atomic with a good friend of mine. So we're focused on grassroots nuclear advocacy. In the beginning days, that was a crazy, huge door-to-door campaign in Ohio where we knocked on 43,000 doors. These days, it's doing exciting events in overseas in Germany at the national labs. Anything we can do to spread the message of nuclear power and also train people in the nuclear field to be better advocates of the technology are things that we work on. And we make lots of cool videos. You should check them out on the internet.
Hi, I'm Heather Matheson. I started Mothers for Nuclear about 3 years ago on Earth Day, so our anniversary is coming up, with my friend Kristen Zaitz. We both work at Diablo Canyon Nuclear Power Plant. And I think we started paying attention to the situation about nuclear in our country when it was announced that our plant was not going to relicense. And we both thought that was the wrong decision and started looking into why and realized that plants around the country are shutting down. And when they are shut down, they're usually replaced with fossil fuels. And so that seems to us like really negative progress for the climate. So from the perspective of Mothers for Nuclear, the reason that we called ourselves that and created our group is because we recognized a big gaping hole in terms of females and mothers who are nuclear advocates. There just aren't a whole lot of us out there, and we think that our industry, like Eric said, has been bad about looking at the human aspects of nuclear energy. We always talk about how safe we are with all of our equipment and all of our different mechanisms to keep the plant safe, and guys with guns and security, and people come away with feeling that there's something really dangerous inside and something that's really complicated to manage. And it's not that at all. It's our best hope for the future. And we want to help mothers and women understand that women should be the biggest nuclear advocates, and that we should also team up with other environmentalists. Like, we're kind of like the hippie representatives in the nuclear outreach community, and just want to show other people who care about climate that they should also care about nuclear.
My name is Theis Beckers. I'm a writer and I make videos, and I've also made documentaries. And my main aim is to try and help people understand why that nuclear is a necessity if we want to go forward in a world with a growing population. So right now we're at 7 billion and we're bound to get to 10 billion. And many people are now trying to convince others that we can power that world with 100% renewables. And I'm not opposed to renewables, but the math just doesn't pan out. And I am here to tell you all this.
Hi, I'm Gary Kahanak with Climate Coalition. My background is environmental science. I've worked in public health, environmental health, also residential energy efficiency, and about 10 years ago, I was anti-nuclear, as many of my colleagues were, but in light of climate change, I started reevaluating, and for about the past 10 years, I've really drilled down into this topic of how do we mitigate climate change, and nuclear bubbled up to the top. So I started a public Facebook group, Nuclear Power for Arkansas, just to keep tabs on the topic. About a year ago, I came across Climate Coalition. Really was founded by Valerie Gardner out in California. And since that time, I've been contributing to that and The whole focus of Climate Coalition is that if climate change really is an existential crisis, we have no business taking any viable low or zero carbon energy source off the table. And we believe that essentially the infighting among pro-renewable factions and pro-nuclear factions play right into the hand of the fossil fuel industry and is very counterproductive. So we think we need a big tent. Nuclear supporters don't have to like renewable energy and vice versa, but let's just say that we're in this together, and the primary goal is climate mitigation, reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And our website has a lot of good information and actually shows there are many groups working toward that end. So that's our focus.
My name is Meredith Angwin. I've been a writer. I started out in renewables and geothermal, and I became a project manager in renewables. And gradually I began to understand the virtues of nuclear, and I switched into nuclear mainly because renewables just weren't enough. I mean, nowadays we have people like Theis and we have McKay of Britain who have done the numbers on it. It's really important. But in those days, it was just like, hey, this is so small. It is not going to take over. And I felt that something clean had to take over, and I've been fighting for nuclear ever since. I guess the main thing also was that I fought very hard to keep Vermont Yankee going. That it didn't win that one, but it was worth doing anyway, because it certainly changed the dialogue around here from everybody hates it to, well, I guess there's some people for it and some people against it. And also I wrote a book about how to persuade people about nuclear. The book is Campaigning for Clean Air, Strategies for Pro-Nuclear Advocacy. I'll just hold it up for half a second.
Well, I want to thank everybody for being here, and I want to ask, what is your assessment of the pro-nuclear movement, and where could we do better?
All right, well, I appreciate that question. My first response is that the pro-nuclear movement is just too small right now for how big the stakes are, for how important this technology is. It's tiny. I've been to the climate talks 4 times now, and each of those times, I would say there are probably less than 30 people, and that's a conservative guess. Maybe in some cases less than 20 people advocating for a technology that is the largest source of carbon-free electricity in North America and Europe. And the IPCC, as noted, is going to be necessary 2 times as much today, all the way to potentially 6 times in the scenarios we have today. So it's maybe globally with active pro-nuclear advocates, I would say maybe 1,000 to 2,000. There's just not a lot of us out there when you consider we're playing for keeps right now. There are a lot of strengths, and scientific literacy is very high in this group. Passion is huge. Caring for people and the environment is a common thread that is held between this group. It's quite beautiful when you actually dig into people's motivations and for spending a lot of their time on it. But with that passion comes a weakness as well, and I think it's a frustration with the lack of understanding that we get in the broader environmental movement, that we see that the science has already proven to be a successful way to decarbonize and could again, but is given short shrift in the media and by other environmental activists who care about the problem of climate change on the scale that we do. So probably from the engineer mindset, that's probably another weakness. They see this problem of nuclear's acceptance or lack of acceptance as a technical one that they can engineer their way out of rather than a socio-political one. Honestly, the reactors we have today are good enough to get us there. And the reason they're not being built at the rate they are is a function of markets and policy that has been shaped by people's perception of the technology. It's a challenge. And as a community, we need to all get better together if we're going to keep pushing this technology forward.
So, and I regard myself as a relative outsider. I'm a one-man show in this regard. I started off as a molten salt reactor fanatic, and right now I'm 100% on board with anybody who wants to build Generation 2 reactors. If they want to build a pressurized water reactor or a boiling water reactor, I will basically go ahead and say, yes, do it. I'm on your side. And this mindset has not yet permeated amongst most nuclear advocates. There are still nuclear advocates out there who believe that thorium is the magic bullet or that molten salt reactors are the magic bullet. But we have to start to realize that the entire technology in all is already mature. And yes, we can do better, but that shouldn't be the aim in and of itself. And that's one of the things I want to communicate personally. And I do acknowledge that me, for instance, I get frustrated with people who want to communicate 100% renewable scenarios. And sometimes I want to punch back. And that's not always the best thing to do. We need a lot more people, a lot more voices. That's my main takeaway there.
Okay, this is Gary here. I echo everything that was said by the folks preceding me here, particularly that this pro-nuclear movement is just tiny. We are far outgunned by the fossil fuel and the solar wind lobbies. But also we need to remember that we're faced with trying to overcome decades of propaganda, and that's not going to be undone easily. So as a result, I think that we need, as small as we are, we need to leverage our efforts. And I think we might do well to focus on policymakers, legislators, and thought leaders of public opinion, to try and deal with the public sentiment at large. It's just a massive task. And, we need to be smart in how we spend our time and who we target. So that's one thing that I have come to understand. There are a lot of independent groups. We need to be more unified. I think that's part of what we're trying to do with Climate Coalition. Messaging, the nuclear industry, they can do a lot better, obviously. And I think that this focus on safety is the wrong message. And I'm not sure what all we can do about that. Now, another thing that I've seen is that there's a conflict here where nuclear power plants are good members of their local community. They provide a lot of jobs. People love having them there. They support the local economy. But because most nuclear power plants are owned by utilities that also operate other forms of power, there's a disincentive to promote nuclear power. As an example, I've been after Entergy, the owner of our one plant in the state of Arkansas, to get out there and join the Arkansas Advanced Energy Association, a trade association for advanced energy, and they won't do it. I think that part of it is that the industry won't promote itself, and there's reasons for that. So, we are evidence, fact, and science-based, very strong in that, but I think use that to target and leverage our input with the thought leaders. So that's, I think, where our most progress can be made.
I'd like to echo what the others said. We are a small group. I feel like we have to get together and chat more and be willing to talk to some group like a Rotary Club or synagogues or churches, Adult Education Day, and get the names of people who sort of agree with us. It seems to me that one of the things that the anti-nuclear people do is they have all kinds of fun. They do skits and they do potlucks and they do marches in funny costumes, and they've decided on the costumes ahead of time. So what I'm trying to say is it isn't a matter of let's get some more facts. It's like, let's get some more fun. Let's go out and see where the other pro-nuclear people are meeting and so forth.
I'd like to chime in on all of this and give my take, and especially since it's the Ecomodernist podcast that we have. I mean, the reason why I started this podcast is because I don't want to preach to the choir. And I don't know if you all have been following my programming. It's not all about nuclear. The natural fallacy is really the root of all of these problems. Nuclear is scary, mysterious, scientific. It's not natural. This is the same problem that the agricultural community is facing. It's the same problem that the medical community is facing. And these are people being victims of the same fallacy who could appreciate our situation. And they're the first people that we should be reaching out to. And I think that's a big reason why I have a modernist perspective, because these are people who are grassroots people in the case of farmers, and in the case of medicine, and even in agriculture too, you're talking about scientists. And you'd be surprised, even though we have 75% of the scientific community that supports nuclear, how many scientists were very illiterate about nuclear power. I've spoken to people with postdoctorates who are anti-nuclear. I spoke with a postdoctorate one time, and she said, well, "What have you been doing?" I says, "Well, I have this podcast and we promote nuclear power." And she's a climatologist. She said, "Well, what are you doing about the climate?" And she don't get the connection at all, because these scientists are often caught up so much in their particular field that they don't really see the whole picture. Just maybe sometimes even less than the layman. And if you get the scientists to go along with you, the public will follow. And the next thing I want to say too is that we got to show respect for people and not assume that anti-nukers are all a bunch of idiots. They just quite often don't understand the technology.
There were just a couple of things that occurred to me. First of all, Meredith, you mentioned the costumes, and I immediately thought of Eric and the polar bears.
Totally fabulous.
That was great. I love them. We can do that too. We can do that. And then the other thing was, we talked a lot about industry promotion and communication. And the last time I ever blogged was 2 years ago, and it was a transcript of a speech that I gave to my local Toastmasters club about Fukushima. And it occurred to me that every nuclear power plant in the country, or in the world really for that matter, really should have something like its own internal Toastmasters club, so that people can get practice with speaking and communicating with the public, because it was hugely beneficial to me. It's a tool that we really could stand to use. I think it would help a lot.
I think that a lot of the studies that are showing that, you can't do it with 100% renewables are also very important. And studies that show that very low levels of radiation, for example, moving to Denver, don't have any detrimental effect on health. There are other studies that are important too. I think our problem is that we tend to think that the next numerical study will be the magic bullet, and the magic bullet is more likely to be ourselves going to a career day at our local high school and talking about why we're nuclear.
I think familiarity is hugely important. Talking face to face with someone, once they see that you're not an evil, scary person, and they have a little bit of trust, and they're familiar with this, that can just work wonders. Again, face-to-face meetings with just average folk, but also if you can target legislators, business leaders, people who are leaders in their community, that can really spread our effort quite a bit.
We've been taking so many pages out of Citizen Climate Lobby's book because their entire approach is about just training regular people to get really good at having the conversation about the issues with elected representatives. So I'm really excited to be unveiling a legislative training to students at the American Nuclear Society conference with a special emphasis on students in Pennsylvania and Ohio, states that have less than 2 months now to pass legislation to save all the nuclear plants in Ohio and 2 for now in Pennsylvania. I think this is a really important initiative, and it warms my heart to hear Gary's head's in the exact same place. And we probably need to connect and catch up after this call. I guess that underscores what somebody said earlier. We need to coordinate more. I think we're so used to being a little bit out on our own, we can forget that we do have some allies that are ready to get each other's backs at a moment's notice. That's I guess, another one of the potential strengths of this community.
And I just did a soapbox on them, and I did it for a very good reason, but that's one organization that has an open tent. And this affords pro-nuke people the opportunity to get out in the public and to fight for climate change as well. I know since I've joined and I've been involved, I've converted the leader of the Miami chapter to becoming pro-nuclear. And in his last meeting, he was telling everybody about Michael Schellenberger and about why we need nuclear power in that meeting. And I would recommend that organization highly, and also because that carbon fee and dividend is something that nuclear power needs. It's about economics. It's not just about activism.
Right. And I'm stoked to see that companies like Exelon are actually putting money into political plays to make carbon taxes a reality. Some of the other nuclear utilities, I hope, like Southern and Duke, I hope will also get on board. But I think they're looking at their total portfolio and still seeing a lot of gas and a lot of coal in there and thinking, this might hurt us more than it helps us. The utilities have to be big players in this transition to a clean energy economy. So hopefully can find a way to include them, because I think then it becomes a lot more realistic from a political standpoint for this to happen quickly.
I know that climate is what has motivated me to be involved with nuclear power, as it's the only effective way to decarbonize, which puts us at the tip of the spear in the climate movement in a way, even though we're not involved in that movement as we should be, at least in my opinion. What do you all think should be our relationship to the environmental movement?
I mean, that's the title of my book, Campaigning for Clean Air. But there are other reasons to be in favor of nuclear, and not everybody is going to join for the same reason. It's quite important to recognize that. When I was campaigning for Vermont Yankee, there were people holding up things saying, keep Vermont Yankee running, who basically thought that climate change is a big hoax. So what I'm trying to say, it doesn't mean that you have to believe X or you have to believe Y to be pro-nuclear. That said, I think that many of the people, certainly in this list, including myself, who are pro-nuclear, one of our major reasons is for clean air. And so the question is, what is our relationship with the rest of the environmental movement? And that's very complicated, because if they're going to be mean to us, maybe we shouldn't hang out with them. I mean, I have been in situations where environmentalists have said things to me like, have a good cancer. It's not so much fun as it could be. So what I'm saying is that I think we have to be willing to talk, and we have to be respectful, and we have to be really sort of almost turning the opposite cheek when someone is insulting. But I think to some extent, it's up to the environmental movement to be at least open to listen to us. And if you say, oh, Meredith, you're being so mean, I'm going to say, okay, so I'm a mean lady. Okay.
I do agree with Meredith. To me, climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, is a first order problem. If we don't solve that one, none of the other problems facing humanity really matter that much. So we can't just let that go. And we have the facts on our side. I know the public may not respond to that as well, but climate change, climate action is getting a lot of press. You know, we've got students on strike across the world. We're only going to see more and more of that. So I think we need to really underline the fact that nuclear is a major player and that we cannot solve this without it. We need all aspects of solutions, certainly. But if you remove nuclear, we essentially fail. And I would call that a critical control point. So that's my first thrust. But at the same time, we should not downplay the other benefits of nuclear. And there are many. We know what they are. I'm not going to go through them. That's my take on it. You know.
I have done a lot of soul searching lately, and I'm not sure whether we should try to get into the big environmental tent, because there are forces in that tent that will try to push us out again. We should regard this environmental thing not as a big tent, but as a big fair with all different tents. And our tent just has to become bigger. And I think that we have to try and bridge more gaps. So yes, environmentalism is my prime motivator to do this, but I also see potential allies at places where people are lukewarm to environmentalism. So do I want to become a diehard environmentalist with all the stuff that is attached to it? Some of us can, and I'm looking at this from an individual standpoint, but I do understand the need to at least ally ourselves with big environmental groups. Look at, for instance, what you did, Gabriel, embedding yourself in Citizens Climate Lobby and convincing a leader of your local group that nuclear is necessary. Those are important victories. And I think that within the environmental movement, that should be our focus, to achieve those victories and slowly but surely render those 100% renewable forces or the blatant anti-nuclear forces less effective over time. But it's going to take a while, and I'm not convinced that we can pull something like this off within a time frame of like 2 or 3 years. It's going to take 5 or perhaps even 10. I am convinced that we can do that, but I want to maintain all avenues. I want to be capable to speak to, for instance, a Republican and say, listen, guy, I mean, I know you don't take environmentalism seriously, but there are also other merits to nuclear power that will help you get on board with what I'm trying to achieve. But I do want more allies, so we have to work to achieve that goal.
I have a really personal story with environmentalism growing up. Save the Whales campaign by Greenpeace. I was all over that when I was a kid. When I was in college, I was the recycling chair for my dorm. And just like gradually over the years of doing that, I realized that most people aren't going to change their habits. They like a certain quality of life, and they're not really willing to go in the other direction. I guess what made me really become a nuclear advocate is using less resources. We need to provide large-scale solutions for a lot of people that want a comfortable life. So in terms of environmentalists now, I want to reach out to them and talk to them and see whether they think other people are willing to do that. So let's see, I was part of the Sierra Club program called Ohm Connect. It's a demand side management where they try and encourage electricity users to turn down their power usage during certain hours of the day when lots of the dirtiest power plants have to come online because there's no solar and no wind. So they send out these alerts to people to turn off your TV or save power for this 1 hour when the grid is the dirtiest. And I found for myself, trying to use that program, that I would get these messages and look around and, well, there's nothing I can turn off. So we need to provide solutions that are realistic for people who want to have good lives. Environmentalists hearing that story of evolution for me might be a little more willing to consider that viewpoint.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Heather. People aren't ready for that, and we're seeing kind of a very extreme blowback of that in the characterizations of the Green New Deal right now. But I did go to the climate strike today and interviewed a bunch of kids about it. And the conversations kind of all went a similar way, where I would ask them, why are you here today? What are you worried about for the future? There seems to be a little bit of a disconnect in some of the people in the environmental community and what some climate scientists seem to think, and IPCC, in regards to the role of nuclear. I'd introduced the topic of advanced nuclear, and that was a game changer for a lot of these kids and these people at the climate conferences too, who didn't realize there were other types of reactors that are being designed and are in the permitting process right now and are just around the corner. And when they realized that, it was like you could see a new sense of hope that we might have even more tools than we have today to accomplish our goals. So going back to the original question about our relationship with the climate movement, I do think that overall we do need to be joiners. We are going to get some resistance from parts of the climate movement that have a storied history of anti-nuclear activism. But I think as we get more scientists on our side, more politicians on our side, that group will continue to marginalize themselves, just like the anti-vax movement has done, just like the anti-GMO movement has done. Even Bill Nye was against GMOs and eventually had to come around on that one. So some of our volunteers have been doing an amazing job at doing exactly this. I already mentioned a couple of them, including Jim Hoff, who I didn't mention it. He's been systematically calling all of the environmental groups in the Philadelphia area, because we did some research and found out that the freshman Democratic legislators in that area are the most resistant to including nuclear in that state's clean energy portfolio standard. And so he's had just lots of one-on-one conversations with these folks on the merits of nuclear, and by and large convinced almost all of the people he's talked to. And we're making plans to go to Harrisburg and lobby together. And another one of our volunteers is setting up a screening of Pandora's Promise in partnership with the Sustainability Council at his college. And that's how you get a room full of people that might not agree with you into actually engage with the topic. Give them some speaking opportunities, co-promote it. It's great. Now, if you would have just printed out posters and said, I'm screening this as myself or as Generation Atomic, you'd be hard pressed to get 10 people in the room probably. But because of that co-partnership, it opens up to a new audience. So I'll say one more thing. We've been thinking about how to get more people involved, very much along the lines of what Climate Coalition has been thinking about. How do we get the broader climate movement involved in saving nuclear plants and laying the groundwork for advanced nuclear? And we're going to be launching Action for Climate with actions in all 50 states, but it won't just be nuclear stuff. We're going to have things on carbon taxes. We're going to have things on biomass, things that the broader climate community can get on board with. While they're there, they can see, wow, there's a lot of things that have to do with nuclear power. I wonder why that is. And so we're hoping that this is a platform that a broader movement will participate in if they want to do something in their community to promote new clean energy. So it's something I'm really excited about. And I hope we can look back in a year and all of our efforts have paid off and we have really, really broadened this movement to save these plants and get ready to build some more.
Yeah, I'd like to chime in myself a little here. And I'd like to compliment you, Eric, on something that you didn't mention. The last time they had the climate march, you encouraged everybody to get out there with pro-nuclear signs and to send back pictures. That's what we need to be doing, because we are objectively at the tip of the spear. I can't say it enough. Nuclear is the solution. All the facts are tremendously on our side. So, we need to be there. I'm going to tell you a little story, right? I came into nuclear power from the environmental movement because I came to realize the beauty of it as a solution, okay? And I used to be in the Green Party, actually, even. But I've been involved with 350, and it's gone from being called a shill and even taken off the Facebook page, even though I was on the board because I defended nuclear power. It's gotten to the point now, because of my persistence, that every once in a while I put stuff out about nuclear power, and we used to have big brouhahas. Now, hardly anybody answers, or people ask questions, and it's never disrespectful, and people don't even disagree. And I think we need to learn something from both the civil rights movement and the gay movement. The sit-in people who went to the counter and ordered food when it was whites only, and how when everybody was throwing spitballs at them and you name it, they just remained calm. And their dignity is what won the masses of people over. And I think that's how we have got to be. This is very difficult, it's painful, but this is a struggle. Now, as far as the gay movement, there are a lot of people in the environmental movement that are afraid to come out, just like gay people were afraid to come out, and get them to come out too. And I think we should think about it in that way.
We've mentioned the Green New Deal, and of course it's the big news. Right now, it's more of a vision statement, a set of goals and objectives that we want to accomplish. And so many different people have their own ideas of what should be a part of this Green New Deal. So what should be our position on the Green New Deal?
Because I just wrote a piece about this. It's about to be published in the Fourth Generation blog. I think the Green New Deal, if you look at it from a PR perspective, it's a force to be reckoned with. Having said that, politically, it's dead on arrival. It's such an enormously convoluted plan with so many hyper-partisan ideas. And here's the thing, the political pendulum in the US is guaranteed to swing every 4 to 8, maybe if you're lucky, 12 years. And the pendulum basically crushes everything that has been built up that is hyper-partisan. Because the other side would just take the sledgehammer and break it apart piece by piece. And I do understand where these people are coming from, but I have a feeling that we are giving too much credence to this plan. And if you look at it rationally and objectively, I think it doesn't stand a chance. I would love to walk up to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and say, listen, I understand where you're coming from. You're trying to change the world. But take a step back and try to work with your fellow representatives and try to reach across the aisle instead of trying to pull everybody to the left, which he's trying. I haven't seen her say anything blatantly negative about nuclear energy, so I don't know if there's a small opening there. I mean, there's plenty of Democratic representatives and senators who are overtly pro-nuclear, so we have to work with them. And I would love to get Bernie Sanders on board and Alexandria on, but chances at this moment are slim. I think they are inundated in the 100% renewable narrative. So I'm not too thrilled about the Green New Deal.
Okay, Gary here. I agree with Theis that because of the hyper-partisan social agenda of the Green New Deal, I mean, that's a hot potato. Whatever goals you had will not be attained. So I guess my perspective on it is to say, look, climate change is urgent and we really welcome the increased attention to it. That's a very positive message that has been lacking for years. We should celebrate that. That's fantastic. We have seen that nuclear power is a big player and that can contribute to that, and leave it at that. Because I think once you step into the social programs, there's no way that in anywhere near its current form that would ever pass. So I think it's just better not to even go there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm largely in agreement with both you guys. The one thing I love about it is how it has galvanized a lot of people around doing something on climate change. The kind of the main talking points of the environmentalist left, even just a year ago, there's stuff on climate, but a lot of it was focused on stopping pipelines and divestment and kind of these kinds of things. And you don't hear as much about that. Now it's more focused on, okay, we got to build a lot of clean energy really quickly. I think one of my larger frustrations about it is that it has overshadowed a decade of citizen activism and just slow, meticulous movement building by Citizens Climate Lobby in favor of a technology neutral piece of legislation that had already garnered bipartisan support. and something that would help out a lot of people by putting some more money in their pocket every month. And that's the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividends bill. It was in the same month that that piece of legislation was finally introduced after all of these years of building the support of people all the way down at mayoral level to governors, all the way up to sitting legislators and senators, to get that thing actually on the agenda and introduced. And then Sunrise Movement is camping out in people's offices, and AOC rides into Congress in a blue wave and in the media and all the coverage. I mean, I am a CCL member, but I haven't been working on that bill for a decade like so many people have. And I can just imagine their frustration to have all the attention shifted to a policy that's less based in science, less based in economics, and has no bipartisan support. That's got to be frustrating. So I'm hoping the silver lining is that AOC will have shifted the Overton window. I talked to a lot of kids today, and I would say about 3/4 of them said that we're all going to die, with the straight face, said we're all going to die in 12 years if we don't do this. But at least the urgency's up, and it's become a talking point where it never has been before. It's going to be one of the prime subjects of debate, certainly in the Democratic primary and most likely in the presidential campaign of 2020. So that's great. So between now and then, it's on us as nuclear advocates to make some friends and try to get this issue worked in there in a friendly way. And also all of the economists and energy analysts and climate scientists to stand up and say, look, we need all of the above here. This isn't a good idea from a climate perspective, cutting emissions perspective. It's also not a good idea from a ecological perspective when we're digging up this much extra raw materials to make all these renewable technologies, and we're covering this much extra land and paving over all this habitat. That's not good. We don't want that as environmentalists. That's not good for anybody other than utility companies that get sweetheart deals for putting in these types of technologies, and the companies that are building them and their investors. It's not good for the average person. It's not good for the environment. So I'm hoping we have enough time to make that idea salient over the next couple of years. And we have a couple strategies in the works to try to get this topic into the discussion circle within AOC's circle and within the Sunrise Movement, to make it so they don't have to do like a very public mea culpa apology, and instead can behind the scenes kind of evolve on the issue in their own way, rather than us just calling them out and be like, you're terrible. We understand that these things are sensitive and emotional topics, and you never want to seem like you're flip-flopping on an issue. We're trying to go in with a scalpel or maybe a velvet glove.
We need a Green New Deal, but we have to point out to people on the left and let me put it precisely, a shit show Germany was. And the evidence is as overwhelming that climate change is real. It is just every bit as overwhelming that 100% renewable is a non-solution, every bit. And we need to point out to people on the left that we cannot afford to get involved in a boondoggle, because it'll be a failure for the climate, inevitably. And it'll be a failure for people in the progressive movement. And we have Trump, and if we want to see more of that, if we fail, that's what's going to be coming up, as sure as I'm speaking right now.
This Green New Deal is already, on the polar opposite side, a rallying point. People like Trump and Pence are already on record saying, listen, this Green New Deal is fantastic. We absolutely endorse the Democrats who want to continue with this because we know that they will lose. They are absolutely convinced that this thing is dead before it even gets a real shot. And they are happy that somebody like AOC is coming up with this plan so far-fetched. From a political sense, I get that we want to do something revolutionary. I absolutely understand where you're coming from. I feel the same way. But the only way we can eventually defeat this demon of climate change is by forging a lasting thing that will be endorsed by both parties, that will survive whatever political mood swings will occur in the future. It must survive that. And to be honest, that's in the boring space of politics. That's talking about, slow legislation, working with the DOE and bureaucrats. And I understand, we all want to shout from the top of our lungs, we need to do this now. But I'm absolutely convinced that if these 6 reactors get built in India, and if terrestrial energy, and if Thorcon and NuScale commercialize theirs, that we will start building 20 or 30 or perhaps even 40 nuclear reactors within 5 years from now. And that will be a huge victory. But there's no other way. Because at this moment, politically, the Green New Deal is not nuclear friendly. It calls for the end of nuclear energy. At least one iteration that I saw. I don't know if it's the definitive one, but I have very big reservations about this thing.
Maybe we need to be putting forth an alternate vision. Maybe we need to put forth something like a green nuke deal. That would be a vastly different vision of the future. If you have a lot of nuclear making a lot of hydrogen, then you can still fly in airplanes and you can still drive your F-150. There's got to be a better way. I know there seems like there's a lot of people on the fringier part of the left here that they feel like society needs to atone for their environmental sins. And I don't think we should gamble being able to convince hundreds of millions of people to change their behavior. I think we just got to innovate our way out of this problem and come up with some good technical fixes so people can just go about their day. It's hard enough to get by in this country anyway right now. Throwing on some restrictions on top of that would probably make it harder. So yeah, I think that we need to go tech neutral, market-based innovation, which I think is probably going to point to nuclear, and then innovate our way out of the other sources of emissions that we have right now, and embrace research, development, and technology to get us out of this problem.
I agree with this. And you can feel it when you talk to people about nuclear energy, and if you tell them about new technology, they really become attentive, because the general perception is nuclear waste, these things are slow to build, etc., etc. And we have a narrative, I call it the gateway drug, where we can tell people, listen, these are all things that are technically fixable, and there's actually commercial enterprises working towards fixing these issues. Now, in this Green New Deal article that I wrote, I said exactly what Eric just said. We need a technology neutral approach. We can't say carbon neutral or low carbon technologies, but if you add the advent of not having to change your fossil fuel infrastructure, your fuel delivery structure, by deploying ammonia or dimethyl ether or whatever, which you can burn in any old truck. I think that's the key point where you can win over a lot of people. If you can say nothing has to change, you can keep your gas central heating. If you can do that without having to change the infrastructure at all, that's the winning strategy. So, I mean, none of us probably has enough money in the bank to go out and buy a Tesla tomorrow. I mean, I cannot even buy a Nissan Leaf. So how the hell is the Green New Deal ever going to succeed? I mean, there's no way to pay for that. So many people have to change. They have to change their homes. They have to change their car, take the train, which is not always an option for everybody. I mean, I don't know how many million people live in rural America and have to drive like 200 miles a day just to get from A to B. There's people who do that. I mean, We're asking a lot of these people. So my bet is on keeping the infrastructure intact, but supplying the energy through nuclear, which will be a natural conclusion without having to specifically say we need to have nuclear to do that. If you say synthesized fuels, you're halfway there. The only thing that can give you that is high temperature reactors.
Well, you know something, I think it is a myth that a sensible nuclear is either bad for the economy or bad for lifestyles. I think it's exactly the opposite, because it'll put people to work a lot more. I think it'll stimulate the economy. Right now, people are going through rush hour hell through most of their driving lives. That could be eliminated with state-of-the-art public transportation. The perceptions are kind of not really where they should be.
I want to put in another plug for Citizens Climate Lobby, and focus is to be laser focused. We've seen the slow plodding success of that, and I think that as far as the Green New Deal, when we start getting into the social programs, we've lost our laser focus. So I think that should be considered for the pro-nuclear community. And we just recently, several weeks ago, I went to a regional CCL meeting. They had a panel. Nobody was representing nuclear. And they wouldn't let me sit on it, but they did allow me to put up a poster session. And it was interesting how many people came up to me and said, you know, you're right. We can't do this without nuclear. And one young woman said that her reaction when she saw my poster was, why is this here? We're environmentalists. And the points I was trying to make to these CCL volunteer lobbyists is, you don't have to like nuclear, just be comfortable saying it. Remember that nuclear has bipartisan support in Congress, and when you talk to your legislators, nuclear should roll off your tongue the same way solar and wind does when you talk about the benefits of a carbon fee and dividend. I think being laser focused and sidestepping the requirement for social change, I think that might be good.
In conclusion, I agree with Gary. I also agree with Gabriel. We need something better. We need people with legislative power and the popular counterbalance to AOC to come forward with something like that. And counterbalance doesn't necessarily have to mean right wing. I mean, that could also be like an upcoming presidential candidate like Cory Booker or somebody like that. Personal, I'm going to do a shameless plug here. My channel has been growing since I put out the documentary, and I'm really happy with that. I went from 650 to right now it's 918. If I may, I would like to ask the listeners here, I don't know how many there are, I bet 10,000 or 20,000 at least. Get over to the Nuclear Humanist channel and press subscribe. I think I can make 1,000 before the summer is up. And might surprise some of you, I'm going to make a second documentary. I've learned a lot from making the first one, mistakes I made, things that can be done better. It's going to be called Radiation from Mind to Patient, where I basically follow a chunk of rock all the way to the patient. So that's one of the things that I'm going to work on. It's going to be very informative. And I'm working on a refutation series, about 10 or 15 3-minute videos that are going to be purely, this is the myth surrounding nuclear energy. This is why it's a thing. This is what the experts say about it. Here are the references. Use this whenever you encounter this, or become so familiar with it that you become like Eric is training his guys, somebody who gets to let that roll off his tongue and just be so convincing that somebody else is like, oh, you sold me. Oh, and there's another thing. Alan Metzger and me, I'm going to drop it here. We are going to do a weekly or a bi-weekly nuclear news talk, where the two of us are going to just talk over whatever is going on in nuclear land and just make it relatable and easy and accessible. Because I learned that actually within the 918 subscribers that I have, there's actually a boatload of people who are actually not really per se pro-nuclear or are becoming pro-nuclear because they're following the channel. So I'm very pleased with that.
And that's it for our show today. This is Gabe Ignetti.
And this is Eric Schmitz.
We'll be signing off till next time.